Right, so we're going to do a little review of the material that some of the stuff we did earlier in the year, so you're not going to necessarily remember it all. So I'm just going to kind of run through the questions. Number one here was we started off the year with Central and South American cultures. Aztecs, they were fabulous warriors. They all kind of managed to assimilate or bring in different cultures. Same with the Inca, were even more impressive that way. They had a huge empire of different cultures that they were able to kind of bring together, and that's why they were memorable. They were also memorable because they were conquered by the Spanish. Pizarro came into Machu Picchu, and he came in and took Atahualpa, took control of him, captured him, and remember he filled up a room full of gold, and he was able to extract a huge ransom, and they were after the gold from the Inca. But just a few hundred men, 150 some men, were able to do that. Same thing with the Aztec. Cortez was able to kind of take control of the Aztec the same kind of way, and they were able to control the civilization. So just write down a couple things regarding the Mayans. Weren't quite didn't have a strong empire that the Inca and the Aztec did, but they had an amazing calendar, and they did have a pretty sophisticated civilization too. None of the civilizations had writing, so we don't really know that much about them because of that, other than what the Spanish wrote down when they came in the 15th century. The African kingdoms, that was the next kind of topic we were into. Here on Mansa Musa, he was an incredible leader as far as trying to get Mali recognized by the rest of the Middle East. Mansa Musa was Muslim, and he was famous for his Hajj, or his pilgrimage to Mecca, and where he brought just tons of gold, and he ended up disrupting the gold markets. He brought in so much gold that gold lost its value because it was so plentiful, overpaid for trinket, for just different religious items, and it was just trying to make an impression on the Middle East, this different civilizations in the Middle East. Here, question 3, pilgrims, why did they leave England? It was because of the persecution from the Church of England. They were being, because of their religious beliefs weren't in line with the church. They were, in some cases, burned at the stake, or a lot of times jailed. So they went to the Netherlands. They didn't like the fact that they were becoming kind of turning into, children were starting to speak Dutch, and so they heard about the New World, and they came over on the Mayflower, and that first year they lost about half the original population that came, but they were able to be successful through hard work. The original Puritans, the original Pilgrims, also as they're referred to, were made it because of their hard work and kind of learning how to survive. Pennsylvania, who founded Pennsylvania? It was William Penn. He made it a religious experiment. He was religious tolerance, which hadn't in the late 1690s. Nowhere in the world could you be allowed to conduct whatever faith you believed in, and people came in order to Philadelphia to experience religious freedom. Number 5 here, how do the New England colonies, Middle States colonies, and Southern colonies differ from each other economically? The Southern colonies were cash crops, tobacco, cotton. The Northern colonies didn't have as good soil, didn't have as long growing season, and focused more on the trade or seafaring, shipping, conducting business at sea. So they were, that was the basic idea, how they were different. Middle States colonies were kind of like the Southern. They didn't have the cash crops, cotton and tobacco, but they had wheat and barley and corn, which then they had better growing and soil than the New England colonies. French-Indian War actually began out here in Western Pennsylvania, started by George Washington, or he was involved in the initial conflict. It was a global war, one of the first true global wars. 7 Years' War in Europe, and reason it brought the revolution on was because the debt the British acquired fighting the war, they felt the colonists needed to pay, and so they forced taxes on the colonists. Colonists that kind of began this process of rebellion that led to the American Revolution. Jim Crow. We talked about in February, segregation in the South was made possible because of the court decisions, Plessy versus Ferguson, which created separate but equal facilities. The Supreme Court said this is the way it's going to be, and that's how kind of after the Civil War, how the white people were able to kind of to separate themselves from the former slave populations. It was like this up until the 1960s. But the court case that made separate but equal illegal was Brown versus Board of Education. Separate but equal was not equal, and the process of desegregation began. It took 10 years and a lot of work on the parts of civil rights leaders in order to kind of overturn these different civil rights or these Jim Crow laws that existed in the South. But that was for number 8 there. Number 9, where did the revolution start? It began in Boston, or outside of Boston, Lexington, Concord, but the main or the revolutionary spirit that kind of got the war started began in Boston. The Sons of Liberty and the kind of the battles that occurred after that initial year. The battles kind of migrated south. Saratoga was an exception that was up in upper state New York. And generally, the battles just continued to move south over the course of the war until Yorktown, 1780. Number 10, the American forces, Continental soldiers, had been defeated, Battle of Brandywine, and were forced to spend the winter at Valley Forge. But while there, they were retrained. Baron von Steuben was a Prussian general, military figure who knew the latest tactics and was able to train the Continentals, be a more effective fighting force. A lot of them were, highly undisciplined, and he was able to kind of bring them more into a formidable force. This was proven at the Battle of Monmouth. Even there was one of the generals in the American forces was, I believe it was, right now I'm not remembering his name, but General George Washington kind of rallied troops and brought them back, and they were able to win the day, or at least forced the British to head back to New York. Later in the war, number 11, the fighting tactics that were used was a guerrilla warfare, kind of hit and run. It's very highly effective. War was extremely expensive for the British, and Americans, just by not really kind of engaging in full all-out battles, was able to kind of wear the British down, and eventually they were surrounded and captured at Yorktown. America's first governing document was the Articles of Confederation. It was a failure because it didn't provide enough authority to the Congress that was created. Congress wasn't able to raise an army, wasn't able to kind of raise the funds needed to solve problems, and didn't have the authority to really regulate issues between the states. This was shown by the Shays Rebellion. Farmers were able to kind of take over courthouses and to kind of stop the proceedings in courthouses. And so that became very evident that to the founding fathers, especially people like Alexander Hamilton, that something needed to be done. And he was very influential in convening the Constitutional Congress in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Eventually, after that summer, they produced the Constitution, and eventually it was ratified in 1789. But that document still exists today and has been a good enough governing document that we've been able to maintain the country. A couple of more reasons why it's been successful is that it's kind of given freedom to people, provided as much freedom as possible to people while still enabling laws to be enforced and made. And it didn't put too much power into any one of the branches. That was one of the major reasons why Constitution has been successful, is that no one branch takes too much power in this country. It's a very, very important aspect of the document. 3 reasons America has been a success. One of the biggest ones is that the Constitution. It's created the framework to allow innovation in this country. People who come up with different ideas can get their ideas patented. So that's kind of leads in the government's kind of enabled people to have freedom, but not at the same time. There's consequences for people who break the law, and going back to the innovation, America has been the country with the most innovation in the world, and a lot of the major advances in the world today because of the inventions that America has produced. Another reason why America has been successful is the people who have immigrated to this country were motivated and believed in its concepts, and believed in some of the values that the country represents. So that's kind of like a nutshell of the reasons why America has been successful. The last question here, we were talking about the bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also that one of the lessons we did was the hydrogen bomb at Castle Bravo. And the question here is asking, what is the difference between them? Nagasaki and Hiroshima were fission bombs, meaning that their charges, what created the explosion, the plutonium and the uranium-235, the atoms, the nucleuses in those atoms come apart. And when that happens, it releases an incredible amount of energy, but nothing compared to the hydrogen bomb. The hydrogen bomb utilized the fission bomb to create enough density to mimic the kind of fusion that occurs in the sun. So Castle Bravo, they didn't understand what they were doing. They were using lithium-6, and they ended up creating an explosion that was more than 2 times bigger than what they had initially planned. So that question's a little kind of probably needed more time on that one, but but that kind of gives you an overview of the school year, and kind of some of the topics we learned about. Hope you were able to take in something there, maybe jog some memories from the year.